Hi, today I'm going to present our paper that was accepted at ICNLSP, which is called From Local Hesitations to Global Impressions of a Speaker's Feeling of Knowing. This paper was authored by me, Beatrice Biancardi, and Chloe Clavel. So first of all, an introduction. We rarely speak in the same way that we write. We're always interrupting ourselves. We're always interrupting each other. We're repeating what we said previously. And we're always saying things like, well, so disfluencies are basically this interruption in the fluent flow of speech, and they are a characteristic of spontaneous speech. In this work, we focus on a disfluency called fillers, which are a disfluency filling a pause in an utterance or a conversation, such as or in English. So we have this sort of comic on the right where the professor is asking the student, so the writing isn't going well, and the student is saying, and I think we can tell just from the student's use of filler that the writing probably isn't going very well. So the linguistic literature on disfluencies is rich and shows that they are very informative in spontaneous speech. Fillers are also called hesitations. So our paper is called From Local Hesitations to Global Impressions. So we just wanted to mention there that there is some varied terminology. But despite all the rich linguistic literature that suggests how informative fillers are, in spoken language understanding, particularly for spoken dialogue systems, all disfluencies are considered noise and typically removed from the output transcripts of ASR. So I'd like to give a little example of that. And this is spoken language understanding specifically for spoken dialogue systems. So the focus is on task-oriented dialogue here, where the goal is usually intent classification and slot detection, which basically means to reduce the input into a semantic frame and discard all the rest. So here we have a little robot and the user is saying a train ticket to Berlin, I mean to Paris. And here I mean is clearly disfluent, and the ideal utterance is a train ticket to Paris. So basically the intent here would be to book train tickets. The slot here would be to Paris, discarding the rest of the input utterance. Now in this example here, the filler and disfluencies are not actually informative, but often fillers can be very informative to give you pragmatic context in the dialogue. So the speaker encodes information into their utterance. Basically A is saying here, can I borrow that book? And B is saying, all right. Now, I think that if B had said all right immediately, we might have thought that B was more willing to lend the book. But because B hesitated a bit, maybe B doesn't want to lend the book to A. Basically, the listener has to decode this information. So maybe if A picks up on B's hesitation, then A will start to reassure B, saying, oh, I promise I'll return it by Monday. So just briefly, in a background, to show that many works show that fillers signal new information in the discourse. So there's a lot of linguistic literature that show that fillers can be a cue for new information in the speech stream. And this is both in production and perception. So the speaker can use fillers, produce fillers to show that they are probably thinking of saying a new utterance, new information in the discourse, and the listener can perceive this in that way. And this is basically what we would understand as psycholinguistic models of speech, because psycholinguistic models of speech are very concerned with the role of disfluencies in planning and production and also perception of speech. So the aim of this paper is to study how local hesitations can lead to global impressions that the listener forms. So local hesitations produced by the speaker leading to global impressions that the listener forms. So when we first think of local, our first question is, are fillers produced by the speaker used to signal new information? Then when we consider our global question, we think, what is the overall impact here on the listener's perception of the speaker? So therefore, we'd like to treat all the utterances as a function of discourse that builds up into a sort of global impression the listener has of the speaker. Now, we'd also like to experimentally validate this on a data set of spontaneous speech Because many times when there's linguistic literature and often psycholinguistic literature, it can be done in more limited QA contexts or can be done in laboratory settings. So we'd really like to see if this phenomena occurs in spontaneous speech. So for the data set, we use something called a persuasive opinion mining data set, which is a data set of 1,000 American English monologue movie reviews. Now, I must mention at this time that specifically on American English, it was found that the fillers and were the most commonly occurring tokens, and this is across several different data sets in the literature. We choose this data set because speakers voluntarily and naturally record themselves giving a movie review. So the speakers didn't know that this data set would be, then annotated for like high level attributes, etc. They just wanted to give a movie review to try to convince an audience, oh, you should go see this movie, or hey, I really hated this movie, don't see it. We also choose this data set because there's annotations of fillers available. And the filler count is particularly high in this data set of monologues. So for comparison, the switchboard data set of dialogues that's very commonly used in speech has 1.6% of fillers in all its tokens. Now, in terms of the listener's impressions, so annotators were asked to annotate how confident was the speaker. Now, this is our global impression. So the annotators were asked to watch the entire video and annotate high-level attributes like how confident was the speaker, as well as how persuasive was the speaker, how much do you want to go watch the movie after this, etc. The inter-annotator agreement for this data set for confidence particularly is high, with the CRIPS alpha of 0.7, which I've forgotten to put here. It's very important that the listener was never specifically told to pay attention to fillers. They just had to form an overall impression of the speaker. Now, for the methodology for Q1, we'd like to locally study how fillers can introduce information, and maybe the speaker uses fillers to introduce new information. So we take the metadata of the movie review, which is annotations available of the actor of the movie, the director of the movie, the title of the movie, etc. And we add these patterns. Okay, so we add these patterns to Spacey's rule-based entity recognizer. Then we annotate new versus old information. So you can see here an example of our automatically annotated entities, which we then separate into new entities and old entities to signal new information that's coming into the discourse versus information that's already been introduced into the discourse. Then we study the distribution of fillers with new information, and then the distribution of fillers also with old information. So for the results of Q1, can fillers be produced by the speaker to signal new information? So for all 1,000 videos, the way to interpret this Cliffs delta is a value of -1 would indicate that all fillers occur before the thing being studied. So that's either new entities or old entities. A value of +1 would mean that all fillers occur after the value of new entities and or old entities. And a value of 0 would mean that the distribution of fillers overlap completely. Now we see that fillers predominantly occur before new entities introduced into the discourse, and also predominant or visibly occur after old entities introduced into the discourse. And the distributions of fillers with new entities and the fillers with old entities are significantly different. So now for methodology Q2, we'd like to study what is the impact of this on the listener's perception. So to remind you, the listener has globally annotated after watching the entire movie review, how confident do they think the speaker was? So we split the more high confidence, we take the more high confidence and the low confidence speakers. And we annotate whether a filler was specifically part of a new entity if it was maximally 1 token distance away from the entities that we automatically annotated. So before we just studied sort of this distribution of fillers with new and old entities. Here we specifically consider a filler a part of a new entity if it's maximally 1 token distance away. And then we calculate odds ratios, which are an association measure, which will tell us if fillers used specifically with the introduction of new information, or rather a new entity, is associated with the outcome of confidence. Yeah. Oops, sorry. Yeah, okay. So the results. So does Q2 impact the listener's perception? Yeah, so we found that fillers in the introduction of new information does not have a great association on confidence, neither high nor low confidence. So there are contextual nuances of fillers. If we just looked at the average use of fillers for the low confidence and high confidence speakers, we can clearly say there's a difference between the average use of fillers in low confidence speakers and high confidence speakers. But when we just isolate it to fillers that are used to introduce new information, it seems that those fillers do not have an association with the confidence rating that the listener gives the speaker. We think this is a very important finding in SLU because often SLU studies might simply say that feature X is correlated with outcome Y without necessarily considering the nuance of use. And there's many contextual ways that fillers can be used. And it seems that fillers being used to introduce new information into the discourse doesn't actually have a great effect on the confidence that the listener gives, the confidence rating the listener gives the speaker. So as a takeaway, fillers can be an informative signal in the incoming speech stream. And we've even showed this using a data set of completely natural and spontaneously recorded movie reviews. Movie review monologue videos. Basically, the speaker seems to produce fillers before new information in the discourse compared to old information or fillers used in other ways in the discourse. The listener may be drawn to the mind of the speaker. So in a psycholinguistic perspective, the listener might be drawn to the mind of the speaker and infer possible reasons that the speaker is delayed in their speech. And therefore they might expect or ignore fillers that introduce new information, and then notice when fillers are used in other ways. And therefore that might affect the confidence rating, as we showed in the box plot. We also studied this on a data set of voluntarily recorded and naturalistic monologue movie reviews. So yeah, thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.